Netflix's upcoming reboot of the Chronicles of Narnia is on its way, being led by one of the most successful and versatile directors, Greta Gerwig, coming off her highly successful Barbie film. However, the most exciting part of this adaptation is the return of one of the greatest villains in fantasy history. Long before the world was introduced to the morally ambiguous queens of Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, Narnia terrified a generation with Jadis, the White Witch. The White Witch was a villain defined not by fiery power displays or screaming monologues, but by a quiet cruelty that felt terrifyingly adult in a story meant for children. Thanks to Tilda Swinton's unforgettable performance in the 2005 film, Jadis remains one of the genre's most psychologically chilling antagonists, a benchmark for how to play evil with elegance. As the streaming giant prepares to relaunch the franchise, the success of the endeavor rests less on the CGI lion and more on the woman who claims to rule him. Jadis stands apart from typical fantasy villains because she doesn't rely on the traditional villain standard, which makes them look chaotic, scary, and dreadful. Instead, the White Witch thrives on politics, a monotonous look and voice, and manipulation. She lacks the fiery, disembodied eye of a Sauron or the melodramatic cackle of a Disney witch. In an era where every pop culture villain gets a sympathetic backstory explaining how society broke them, Jadis stands out because she never has one. She was simply born to break everything else. According to C.S. Lewis's original text and the deep lore of Narnia, Jadis isn't even human. She descends from the Jinn and the Giants, a lineage that makes her physically and magically superior to the sons of Adam she hunts. Her terrifying nature was established long before she ever set foot in Narnia. Originally, the Queen of Charn, a dying universe under a blood-red sun, Jadis ended a civil war against her own sister not by winning, but by speaking the deplorable word, a piece of forbidden magic that annihilated every living thing in her universe except herself. She later boasted, "I was the only thing living beneath the sun." This is the definition of a narcissist who would rather rule a graveyard than share a kingdom. This context explains why her arrival in Narnia is so chilling. She didn't freeze the land because she was grieving. She froze it because she was bored and waiting. After stealing a silver apple from the Garden of Youth to gain joyless immortality, she spent 900 years banished to the wildlands of the north, repelled by a magical tree of protection. During those centuries of isolation, she didn't reflect. She evolved. She became an expert in dark magic, developing the wand that could petrify victims into living stone statues, a fate far worse than death. Her 100-year winter is the ultimate expression of this control. If she cannot be loved, she ensures that nothing else can grow. In short, her survival motto was, "If I cannot have it, no one else can." Hence, her winter is the ultimate expression of this control. If she cannot be loved, she ensures that nothing else can live. The genius of her villainy lies in how she translates this cosmic power into psychological warfare. Nowhere is this more evident than in her interaction with Edmund Pevensey when she wins him over with Turkish delight. Identifying his insecurities as a middle child, she offers him a transaction. "Betray your family, and I will treat you like the adult you desperately want to be." It is a terrifyingly mature form of manipulation inserted into a children's story, proving that her greatest power isn't her magic, but her ability to use someone's weakness against them for her own selfish means, and doing that with subtlety. When director Andrew Adamson adapted The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in 2005, he and Tilda Swinton consciously avoided the cackling witch trope that had dominated children's media for decades. They instead opted for a figure who, from the outside, looks ethereal, but from inside is quietly a menace. Swinton famously conceptualized the character not as a fantastical creature, but as something beyond. "She looks like the utmost white supremacist, which is what she is," Swinton once said, describing the character, comparing her to a Nazi. This choice transformed the character from a fairy tale villain into a modern nightmare. Swinton's genius lay in her physicality and vocal delivery. Rather than walking, she seemed to glide across the snow. Rather than shouting, she whispered. In the iconic carriage entrance scene, the sound design drops out, creating a vacuum of silence that sucks the life out of the forest. Swinton's voice was recorded with closed mic techniques to capture every breathy, intimate inflection, making it sound like she was speaking directly into the audience's brain. Visually, the lighting team employed a specific strategy, initially lighting her with a soft, beauty light to make her appear maternal to Edmund, before shifting the shadows into her eye sockets to reveal the skull beneath the skin as the conversation turned dark. A lot of her villainy comes from the visual storytelling, and Isis Mussenden's costume design played a huge part in creating that atmosphere. The gown was constructed using a complex ice crackle technique, layering felted wool, silk, and lace to mimic the organic texture of glacial ice. Crucially, the costume evolved as the narrative progressed. In the beginning, Jadis is tall, spiky, and imposing, physically manifesting absolute control of the 100-year winter. As Aslan, the lion, approaches and the snow melts, her crown shrinks, her dress becomes heavy and slush-like, and she transitions from an ethereal goddess into a desperate, feral warrior wearing a mane of golden fur. Swinton played this degradation perfectly, letting the cracks in her composure show just enough to reveal the panic underneath. Her performance at the stone table, where she plunges the knife into Aslan, isn't a moment of triumph. It is a moment of grim, ritualistic execution. She proved that a villain doesn't need to be loud or dramatic to be mythic. They just need to be absolutely, terrifyingly certain. Greta Gerwig's adaptation has a unique opportunity to deepen Jadis in ways the previous films couldn't. Reports indicate that Gerwig is starting with the Magician's Nephew, the prequel book that tells Jadis's origin story, not as the Queen of Narnia, but as the Empress of Charn. This is a game-changer. It allows the reboot to show the fans Jadis before the ice, revealing her as a desperate, warlike tyrant fighting a civil war against her own sister. With very few details about the plot known, it is too early to say whether the reboot will be based solely on Jadis's life and the events surrounding it, but the lore provides Gerwig with one of the most terrifying concepts in fantasy history: the deplorable word. In the books, Jadis reveals that she ended the war in Charn not by winning, but by speaking a single magic word that annihilated every living thing in the universe except for herself. This transforms her from a static fantasy villain into a figure of unimaginable nihilism. Set images of a 1950s setting for the London sequences suggest Gerwig might frame this destructive power as a metaphor for the Cold War and nuclear anxiety. In this context, the deplorable word can be used in real-world threats, and Jadis becomes the person who drives that terror. Furthermore, the reboot can explore the tragedy of her immortality. After fleeing Charn, Jadis steals a silver apple from the Garden of Youth to gain eternal life. But as the warning at the gates prophesied, those who steal the fruit find their heart's desire and find despair. Jadis gains immortality, but she loses the ability to enjoy it. The fruit becomes ash in her mouth, and her eternal life becomes a hollow, joyless existence, driven only by the hunger for power. This adds a layer of tragic complexity to her character that Tilda Swinton's version hinted at, but never explicitly showed. With the casting of Emma Mackey as the White Witch in the reboot, we might see her as a young figure, but arrogant, passionate, and physically imposing, which contrasts with the coldness of the later years. Fans are hoping the reboot captures the origin, the rise, and the descent of the warrior queen who burned a world to save her throne, only to freeze another one because she forgot how to feel anything else.